So, if you didn't already know, Peak has returned. The first 3 episodes of Invincible Season 3 are finally here, and I'm thrilled to talk about them. There's quite a bit to talk about today, so here's how we're going to break it up. First, I'm going to review the episodes and discuss what I liked about each of them. Then I'm going to take a deep dive breaking down the themes of these episodes and this season. And then I finally will get into some spoilery prediction stuff I have for the rest of Season 3, which I'm pretty excited about because I got quite a few predictions right for these episodes. There will be time codes in the description if you want to jump around to any of these sections. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you enjoy this video. I'll be back every week for more Invincible content. Alright, let's get into our reviews. So, we start the season with a training montage with Mark and Cecil, which I absolutely loved. I've probably said it before, but the idea of a superhero working out and improving their abilities through hard work is really cool to me, and I think it was just so well done here, and even an improvement on how it's done in the comics. I mean, over a Q-Tip song too, come on, man. In the montage, we get a little more backstory on the Giant, who's such a fun character, and we also meet Indy and Debbie. Just kidding. Kinda. I thought the Fight Master dropkick multi-paw fight was adapted really well. I was not expecting multi-paw to be so intimidating, but I think Simu Liu did a great job. Also, a little detail I noticed is that before Mark and Rex leave to go to the National Archives, a GDA agent speaks into a ring, giving the location they're heading to. It's likely that this GDA agent works for the Order as well as the GDA, which is why Multipaul shows up at the National Archives. I think that's a really cool thing that could definitely pop up again, and since it's something that's not in the comics, I wanted to point it out. I really liked Oliver in these few episodes. I feel like they made him feel a bit more like a kid than his comic counterpart. Him wanting to go to the zoo, and play on an iPad, or just little details that, along with Christian Convery's performance, really sell him as a kid. I really like the way they develop Eve and Mark's relationship. I thought it was really funny that William and Rick tell Mark 3 times not to mention the other Eve, and then he ends up telling her anyways. It's going to be funny to see William chew Mark out for that. I think it plays out in such a believable way where you understand why it doesn't work out right away. I thought the Doc Seismic situation was adapted really, really well, but the only thing that I felt it was missing was just a few more scenes of all the heroes being captured by the creatures. If we saw them capture the Immortal, Robot, and Monster Girl, for example, I think it would be a better setup for them being formidable threats. I think they did a really good job building tension in that scene though, with cutting back to Cecil deploying the Reanimant and Darkwing. Stephen Ewan's delivery of "What the fuck" was so good. Ending the first episode on the White Room cliffhanger was a really great choice. I thought that Cecil's backstory in episode 2 was really, really well adapted. Like to the point that you pretty much completely understand where he's coming from when we cut back to the Mark versus Cecil fight, which was just beautiful, by the way. Robert Kirkman was not exaggerating when he said every episode will feel like a season finale. The fight between Mark and Cecil felt as big and as consequential as some of the biggest fights of the show so far. The animation was awesome, and we got a ton of cool moments, specifically when Robot blocks the signal, and then we get a moment of silence, and then just a shit ton of brutal kills that felt very reminiscent of Nolan killing the Guardians. There's so many details in this fight, I could yap about it for a while, but I really liked the scene with Mark, Eve, Debbie, and Oliver after the Cecil fight, and the scene of Mark telling Rick and William about it. Both of them definitely do a lot for the themes they're setting up, but I'll come back to that. I liked that the Guardians split up via a discussion rather than in the moment of the fight. I felt like it gave all the characters more agency rather than just them reacting to Mark's actions, if that makes sense. Also, I haven't mentioned it yet, but the character work with Rex this season has been remarkable. It's gone from one of the easiest characters to hate to being a fan favorite very quickly. Debbie going on a date was nice, and I really like the character work they're doing with her. The additional bit of Cecil's backstory we get at the end showing Nolan's arrival was really brilliant, and I think it helps contrast the backstory we get earlier in the episode by showing that Cecil can actually be wrong. Obviously, I love the scene of Mark and Eve finally getting together. My friends actually audibly cheered when this scene happened. I think it felt very earned, and the way they snuck that line in from the comics was beautiful. Episode 3 starts with a very moving, no dialogue montage that's a fantastic showcase of visual storytelling. And if you're mad about them being gay, go fuck yourself. You don't deserve to be watching this show. After that, we immediately jump into Mark dealing with Oliver, which is a huge focus of this episode, and I think serves as a really fascinating challenge for Mark to deal with, especially on top of everything else he's dealing with. Including a scene where Amber is happy for Eve and Mark was really smart, and I think will help people have some closure on her character. I think the relationship they're setting up with Rex and Ray is really interesting, and I'm curious to see where it'll go, especially since it's something that does not happen in the comics. I love the conversation that Mark and Eve have on the roof of this episode, especially how it parallels Debbie's date, both highlighting how they don't have to take on everything alone. The Mahler scene was adapted really, really well, and I think it continues the idea of each episode feeling like a finale. This moment's already been memed and talked about extensively online, which is awesome to see and highlights just how well they adapted it. The animation and Christian Convery's performance, again, really just make this scene excellent. I've seen some nerds complaining about power scaling stuff with Invincible in this scene, but I think that's a silly thing to be bothered by, and it's also just kind of ignorant to the themes of this season, but I digress. I think having Mark talk with Eve after each traumatizing thing so far this season is really helping build their relationship, especially since she is very supportive and helpful. The scene with Oliver getting a talking to was also very well done and also very good for the themes of this season, which I promise I'm about to get into. I was expecting them to start with the orb tease by this point, but I was not expecting a full-on Angstrom tease this early on. I'm pretty intrigued to see how much they continue to tease that this season if they're already teasing him this much. Also, haven't mentioned it yet, but I love Nolan and Alan's scenes this season so far. I just love what's about to come for them even more. All right, that's probably good for our review section, so let's get into breaking down the themes they're setting up for this season. Change. I think the main theme that's prevalent in these 3 episodes and what it seems like they're setting up for this whole season is change. It's even said multiple times by different characters. People change, things change. Just about every character in the show is going through some kind of change. Mark and Debbie are both getting into new relationships, and both of their lives are evolving with Oliver growing and changing so fast. Nolan, too, is developing sympathy and, quote-unquote, making progress towards a cause he once opposed. Eve is going to college now. Immortal and Kate are getting married. Ray seems to be rethinking the whole superhero thing, and Rex is actively making an effort to be a better and nicer person. Even the Guardians split into 2 separate teams. Nearly every major character is experiencing or going through some kind of transformation, but I think the 2 most prominent examples of this theme are Mark and Cecil. Obviously, Mark and Cecil's dynamic is shifting, but it's deeper than just that. Cecil's grasp or control over Mark, and by extension the safety of the world, is changing. Mark's sense of morality and his priorities are changing. What makes the relationship so compelling is that both of these changes scare them, and that fear is what inherently drives their conflict. Throughout the season, it will be fascinating to see how these 2 characters respond to the shifts within themselves. Mark may become more certain of his new moral perspective, possibly even agreeing with Oliver or Cecil to some extent by the end of the season. And Cecil, on the other hand, might tighten his grip, only to eventually regret it. Essentially, they could up swapping philosophies entirely. This premise and these themes are a great example of the 7 basic questions of narrative drama, which we could get really deep into, but I'll just highlight a couple of them. What does a character want versus what does a character need? And which characters or events push them towards their needs and which ones push them towards their wants? Mark needs to realize that morality isn't always black and white, but he wants to hold on to the morals he has and he wants to avoid becoming his father. Cecil needs to understand that while operating in the gray area is sometimes necessary, there are some evils that can't be undone, some things that simply can't be controlled. However, he wants to believe that anyone can change and that his iron grip is essential to protecting the world. Mark and Cecil push each other towards their needs, but away from their wants, which fuels their conflict. But if they both complete their character arcs and learn what they need to, they'll ultimately end up closer to each other than before. The flashback at the end of episode 2, where it's revealed that Cecil always suspected Nolan was lying about his reasons for being on Earth, highlights that he's already on the path towards regretting his morally gray decisions. Meanwhile, Mark's conversation with Oliver at the end of episode 3 suggests that he's beginning to consider a more flexible moral code himself. The theme of change is deeply woven into the fabric of Invincible Season 3. It's not just about plot progression, it's about characters evolving, questioning their beliefs, and confronting the uncertainty that comes with transformation. And if the show continues on this trajectory, the payoff for these arcs could be incredibly rewarding. Alright, that was a pretty deep dive into some nerd writing stuff, which I hope you enjoyed, but something I know some of you will enjoy for sure is some predictions. So, if you do not want anything for the remainder of Season 3 spoiled for you, I would just stop watching here. Okay, nerds. I ended up being right about way more than I expected. Obviously, got a few details wrong, but the gist of the first 2 episodes is pretty close to what I predicted, which has me stoked for the rest of the season. I was wrong about episode 3, but it looks like I just had episodes 3 and 4 flipped, and the prison break will be in 4. The big kicker with this season is not only did we get a 3-episode premiere, we also got episode titles, descriptions, and thumbnails for the remainder of the season. So, fuck it, let's get into it. Episode 4, You Were My Hero. 2 strangers ask Mark for help with a mysterious villain. Elsewhere in the galaxy, Nolan grapples with his identity and Alan finds a surprising new ally. Sounds like they're doing the prison break and the future immortal stuff. Like I said, I just got most of 3 and 4 flipped from my prediction, which... Wait, what? I also predicted was a possibility. Episode 5. This was supposed to be easy. Mark and Eve start a business and encounter a familiar face. Debbie worries that Oliver is growing up too quickly. Sounds like they're adapting the Titan and the Order stuff along with Mark and Eve starting Invincible Inc., which, if you remember, the Invincible starts as Mark goes on his first call. I initially predicted the Invincible War would start at the end of episode 5, but I'm not super confident in that based on what we know about episode 6. I also initially predicted the Titan stuff would be episode 4, so it looks like I was wrong about that too. Episode 6. All I can say is, I'm sorry. A powerful new figure challenges Mark's idea of what's right and what's wrong. Ray approaches Rex with a big life decision. The thumbnail picture shows Powerplex, and that kind of fits the description, so it sounds like that's likely the case. I initially predicted the Powerplex stuff would happen in episode 5, so it seems I was wrong about that. Episode 7. What have I done? Earth's greatest heroes join forces to fight an unimaginable threat. Sounds like Invincible War for sure. Episode 8. I Thought You'd Never Shut Up, which does not have an official synopsis yet, but it did happen to leak accidentally. With the world still reeling, a dangerous stranger arrives, testing Mark to his limits and beyond. It's definitely a conquest. I've seen a lot of people getting mixed up by this title, as it's a line Mark says to Dinosaurus in the comics, which means he's likely saying it to Dinosaurus as well in the show. However, I've seen a lot of people suggesting that this means the finale may not be Conquest, or that the finale is going to be Mark versus Dinosaurus or whatever, but nah, bro. Just as Nolan once said, read my books. Mark says that line to Dinosaurus in issue 68. The Invincible War concludes in issue 65. But issues 66 and 67 are about Nolan and Alan. So sequentially, the issue where Mark says this line is the first issue with Mark after the conclusion of Conquest. So it makes sense that they would be getting to Dinosaurs in this episode. I think it'll likely be a cliffhanger at the very end of the episode to show that Mark isn't completely depressed and hopeless, you know? Anyways, to give a brief prediction for the rest of the season, I think the Invincible War will start in episode 6, take up most of episode 7, and Conquest will come in late episode 7. I think we may see the Wolfman situation in episode 5 or 6, but who knows? Any other specific stuff or details? Who knows, man. Let's just enjoy this season. It's going to be fucking awesome. All right, I think that'll do it for this week's video. Make sure to check back next week for a review, breakdown, and discussion of episode 4. Also, make sure to like and subscribe and all of that. I'll see you next time. Peace.
The Nerd Authorities. The Nerd